Sorry, good morning everyone. We're at 9:30, so we can resume the hearings. We ought to, I think, do housekeeping, even though Mr. Jones has probably heard it before, but yeah, let's do it. Go on.
Yeah, I think we all know the score now, so we've practiced at it. Just a quick reminder that if you're not signed in, if you sign at the desk at the front, obviously we do have other people in the building today who are going to classes. They'll be going up the room behind us. Yeah, door security, just use the main front door if possible. Don't use the side doors, please, at this stage. The Wi-Fi is very good here. Obviously, the sign is Citadel Guest, and the passcode is General Booth 1883, capital G and capital B. Toilets through the corridor over there, and obviously we are recording against the sessions today. Please put your phones on your mobiles on silent, and when you want to speak, just press the red button on the microphone. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, we managed, I think, and correct me if I've got this wrong, Mr. Henderson, we managed, I think, to change the programme a little bit, didn't we? So that this morning we're dealing with matters 9, 10 and 11. So environmental matters first, then waste, then communications infrastructure. I think, Mr. Jones, you're here to talk about one of the ENV policies, aren't you?
Yes, but only very briefly, you'll be pleased to hear.
Okay, that's fine. So I suspect the best thing to do would be we'll start with those, and then we'll move on to waste and communications afterwards. So, Mr. Henderson, I don't know if there was anything you wanted to say at the outset about these ENV policies.
So no, there's no overarching submissions from me on these. You will have seen at the back of the matter statement there have been a number of amendments. I hope that they will deal with Mr. Jones's concern. Certainly, I think it's ENV 4 on flood risk that he was concerned about. But what I'll ask Ms. Bartle to do very briefly is just to whiz through ENV 2, 3 and 4, just take you through those modifications in an outline form to start the discussion.
Yes, thank you. So, as you'll see in ENV 2, we have proposed a number of modifications, but they don't significantly alter the premise of the policy. All of the modifications to each part of the policy are really intended for clarity purposes, to provide a clear indication for what applicants are required to consider in considering their applications, so that the basis on which the policy was originally submitted remains, and the objective is there, but they're really all matters of clarity in that respect. No changes proposed to the explanatory text. It's simply just the policy itself on those. Turning then to ENV 3, which deals with contaminated land. Again, a similar approach applies. No significant alteration of the policy approach itself, but rather clarity of wording, again, to make clear for decision makers and applicants what the intention is and what the requirement is in terms of considering contaminated land and the outputs of any assessment, ensuring that there are no significant impacts that are likely to arise. And again, no modifications proposed to the explanatory text in that one. So if we then move to ENV 4, which deals with Council's flood risk policy. And this one, on the face of it, again, does look like quite a significant set of modifications, but really all proposed for clarity purposes in this respect. Again, retaining the overarching objective and the key points of the policy as originally submitted, but making it a little bit easier to interpret and apply to an application, making it clear that what the requirements are, particularly around the requirement for flood risk assessment and at what point they would be required, and all of which is consistent with the NPPF. And yeah, on the final, we don't number them, but the final paragraph of the policy is just a kind of an elaboration of what was originally presented, but just to make clear the approach to making sure that considerations are given to integrating green infrastructure and natural flood management into proposals where it's necessary. Again, that's consistent with NPPF paragraph 99. And the proposals for some minor modifications to the explanatory text, again, correcting some drafting errors and updating for example, in paragraph 12.35, the sustainable drainage guidance is not emerging, it is now in place. So again, just matters of clarity rather than anything more substantial. And no modifications proposed to ENB 5.
Thank you, that's helpful. Mr. Jones, so should we deal with your issue?
Yes, I mean, rather embarrassingly, I think the proposed mods have actually addressed most of the, the majority of the comments we made, but clearly our statements were written before we'd seen them, so. But I suppose just for clarity, yes, we made comments in relation to policy ENV2 in our statement. As has been explained, there's some fairly significant modifications which deal with the points we'd addressed, so there's nothing that we need to raise further on that particular policy. The other points we made in our statements related to policy ENV4, and again there are, as has been explained, some fairly significant modifications proposed to that policy. Again, in the main, really, they address the concerns we had. The only comment, really, that I want to make on the revised wording, the revised proposed wording of policy ENV4, and this is just, in my view, to help make it clear, the now second paragraph of that policy states that development located in areas known to be at risk from any form of flooding must demonstrate that, number one, there is no increase in flood risk locally or elsewhere in the catchment. In our view, it would just be helpful and it would make it clearer if it was set out somewhere in that wording that its impacts resulting from the development only that the policy is talking about. Clearly, there's reference to elsewhere in the catchment, which I understand, but it could be construed that it is sort of cumulative impacts, whereas actually it's talking, I think it should only be talking about direct impacts from the development proposed. But that aside, I think our statement comments have been addressed. Thank you.
Thank you.
So yes, we hear what was said there. We wouldn't be adverse to including some words at the very end of that subparagraph, perhaps along the lines of arising from the development. We would just caution a little bit because it could be that cumulative impacts are relevant, so we wouldn't want any wording that would rule out consideration of cumulative impacts. That might be a relevant consideration, but we'd be happy to focus that part of the policy on the development so that it's individually or cumulatively from the development, it's still tied to the development. That would be something that we would be happy to take away and propose a couple of extra words. I think it's all that's needed in that part.
I think it would aid clarity on that. Just a couple of small points or questions, if I may. On ENV 4, the flood risk policy. The first part of the policy, in the first paragraph, you've got proposals will be considered against the NPPF, including application of sequential test and, if necessary, the exception test. Always a bit wary of including references to the framework when we're dealing with this under the transitional arrangement, and there's scope for confusion as to which version. I mean, I wonder if that could be worded in a slightly different way.
Possibly, sir, but I'm not sure we've identified any material difference in terms of the sequential test and the exceptions test between the 2012 and the 21 version. There was an exercise undertaken. It wasn't undertaken recently, but there has been an exercise that's looked at that. So perhaps we will double check that. And my submission would be, if it's all the same, we'd leave it as it is. That would be my proposal.
I'm content with that. But other than that,
Yeah, I have to say I'm always a little cautious when it comes to flood risk, because it is, frankly, a very serious issue, and particularly in York, among other places. Yeah, I mean, I think that you are right in relation to the sequential test and any difference in the 2012 and current MPPFs. However, I wonder if, for effectiveness, to make sure that it is effective, that part of the policy should actually embed some of the wording from the MPPF itself. Who knows what any future MPPF might say. And as well, you know, I mean, as currently worded, it says proposals will be considered against the MPPF. Well, it kind of sounds like, well, yeah, we'll consider it, but we'll come to another decision if we want to. I think for effectiveness, I would like to see something more certain and concrete in that part of the policy.
All understood, sir. Certainly something we can achieve. It might be a copy and paste in many respects, but we can take that away and look to come up with a form of wording that encapsulates what you've just suggested. That's absolutely fine.
It always feels a little like cheating, but I think that avoids any difficulties in future in terms of determining applications and or appeals.
is there anything else on the ENV policies then, Mr. Jones?
Not from me, no.
Yes, sorry. Having said no, apologies. Sorry, Mr. Griffiths. I just wanted to check, in the second set of bullet points, in flood zone 1, you've got the larger than 1 hectares caveats. I was wondering where the 1 hectare came from.
Mr. Ragg is the expert on these matters.
Yes, sir. The larger than 1 hectare comes from the Environment Agency's standing advice on how to prepare a flood risk assessment and when things can be considered, either directly from the wording in the standing advice or if a flood risk assessment is required. And the larger than 1 hectare is the current wording in that regard.
If it helps, sir, this isn't an uncommon approach. There are other local authorities, in fact, I have a case on in the High Court at the minute where this point is an issue. Other local authorities adopt exactly the same approach.
Yeah, maybe you can help me out here, because as I say, when it comes to flood risk, I am always very, very cautious. And I'm wondering if the 1 hectare is cautious enough, to be honest. And I wondered if you could help us out there. I understand that it's from EA standing advice. I get that point. But if you are allowing something in flood zone 1, let's say a house, which you potentially might be, mightn't you, under the application of this policy, that would mean that that application wouldn't require, potentially, depending on the size of the site, a flood risk assessment.
Unless Part 2 kicked in with the surface water.
Correct, sir, subject to Part 2, which does narrow that slightly. So if you were in an area affected by flooding from sources other than the rivers and the sea, surface water runoff, that would kick in. But flood zone 1 is also the lowest, the lowest risk zone, as obviously we're all aware. This seems to us to be a proportionate approach. I don't know if Mr. Ryde wants to come in.
Yeah, if I may, sir, yes, I think the last statement is correct. It's flood zone 1. We've got a very strong designation of flood zone 3, 2, and 1 within the city. A fairly quite tightly incised river channel on the River Ouse and its tributaries. So we have good confidence that the Environment Agency's mapping of flood zones 1 through 3 represents an accurate representation of what happens during flood, and we have a rich, if that's the right statement, history of flooding here in the city and constant reviews and investigations afterwards. So we are confident that if things do come forward in flood zone 1, that it is flood zone 1. But what we also do is, as a statutory consultee in the planning process for surface water flood risk matters, we're also required to only look at major developments, in that statutory consultee role. But what we actually do is, and our guidance document, the Sustainable Drainage Guidance for Developers document, we outline a less formal approach for minor developments, but we still encourage developers to consider the impacts that would come from a single property or a small number of properties in that regard. So we do go above and beyond what's laid out by DEFRA Environment Agency requirements in that regard. So I would suggest that we've got a representation there of what needs to be considered for a flood risk assessment directly from the Environment Agency guidance, but with that understanding and cognizance of where is affected within the city because of our history, and also that we go a little bit beyond that in our guidance to developers as well. So I would suggest that there is further headroom there to cut out any errors or potential missed problems. I think is probably what was the thrust of your question, sir.
So just to make good that point, if you have our matter statement and you turn to PDF page 24, you will see a helpful flowchart which illustrates what Mr. Raj has just described to you. We have appended that guidance to the back of this matter statement, and I won't take you through all of it, but in terms of having a quick glance, if you look at that flowchart, it's the easiest way into the document. And essentially, so we say that is the council's approach. It sits alongside what we've put in the policy word, and we think that is, notwithstanding York's rich history in this area, it's an appropriate and effective approach.
Okay, thank you for that. That's helpful.
Right, we'll move on. Sorry, excuse me. We'll move on to the WM policies. Thanks for your help. That's really appreciated. Thank you. I don't know Mr. Henderson, whether you need to take us through those. We've not got much in the way of representation on them, and I think that I don't think there are any major changes proposed to them either.
Correct, sir. There are actually no changes proposed with our matter statement to these policies. They are fairly self-explanatory. We have a very recently adopted waste and minerals plan on a joint basis with the neighbouring local authorities. It's publicly available, so we haven't put it into the examination library. I don't propose to do so today unless you want us to. And essentially, these two policies tie this plan together with the minerals and waste plan and deal insofar as necessary with matters that would pertain in the development control context, for example, on-site recycling, refuse, etc. Is predominantly the first one in WM2, and then similarly in WM2, minimising consumption of resources through major developments. Topical, of course, cement, the Tulip, Debenhams on Oxford Street, all of those decisions which we've become aware of recently. That in a nutshell, sir, is what these policies do. We don't think we need to go any further, and no one's brought forward any representations that we say go to soundness. In fact, there's no matter statements, and at Reg 19, Miss Bartle's been through, and there's virtually nothing on these policies.
No, I don't have any specific questions, so frankly I think that we can deal with it in writing insofar as it's covered in writing.
If it's a read across to a recently adopted minerals and waste plan, yeah.
Yes, adopted in April of this year. It is, yeah. I think Mr. Linus had the joy of the examination for that one. So that essentially is our position. The only one thing I should say, actually, of course, arising from that very recent adoption is there are a couple of minor modifications needed in the supporting text where we said emerging, where obviously we need to delete that, but we will tidy that up in due course, and we don't need to trouble you with that today.
I don't think we need to detain ourselves any longer on those. The other thing, or the other policy that we wanted to cover this morning was policy C1, communications infrastructure. And I think there are some changes proposed to that policy as I understand it.
So that's absolutely correct. Policy C1. Miss Bartle will, in a couple of moments, just talk you through those amendments, which are, well, they're not significant. I'll make submissions in due course, but she'll explain what they are first.
Yes, thank you. So the modifications set out here, firstly, the second part of the policy, the deletion relates to the provision of the next generation access broadband, which we recognise is now covered by building regulations. So would simply say that it's not necessary to repeat those requirements here in this policy. So that covers the deletion. Similarly, there is some deleted text at paragraph 14.68, which relates to government's objectives and strategies, which really a deletion because they've now been superseded by other events and activities. doesn't provide any clarification on the interpretation of the policy, so arguably superfluous currently. So we take that out. Oh yes, sorry. We have also taken out, I should have referred to this initially, the paragraph at the bottom of the criterion relating to old masts and the removal of those and the approach to conditioning that removal, and reposition that into explanatory text, seeing it more as an explanatory approach rather than any policy basis, given that we're dealing with conditions in that respect. It seemed appropriate to relocate it. Yes, there are all the changes, sirs.
I saw what you'd done in the matter statement, and yeah, it made sense to take that bit about removal and relocation out. And yeah, if the next generation access material is covered somewhere else, well, yeah, it's the building regs matter. Yeah, I've got nothing else I need to say about those. No, thank you. That's helpful. I think that's all we had scheduled for this morning.
So yes, and then return this afternoon for a slightly meatier issue of climate change, and then I think very quickly at the end of the day, health. We're certainly not expecting health to detain us very long, but there are more representations on climate change that will need to be worked through.
Can you just help me with that in preparation for this afternoon? I recall that changes were proposed to the climate change policies, weren't they? Did we talk about those briefly in the last phase?
So I think Mr. Linus addressed you on this in phase 2, matter 8 off the top of my head. It was certainly phase 2. We've taken that on board, and you have those policies as amended in the back of the matter statement. So they are the ones that we will speak to later today, and that is where we've left matters. It is a subject that I will make a couple of overarching submissions on to set the scene at the start of the discussion this afternoon. I think we feel it's quite important that it's put in its proper policy and statutory framework when we come to consider the issue of soundness on that. And we'll also spend some time explaining to you the Council's approach slightly more generally, and where this plan as a land use plan sits within that. There are a number of representations which we are concerned haven't quite appreciated the role of this plan on this issue. That's not to do down the importance of the issue, but that's just, if we all start on the right footing, then hopefully we will find more common ground more quickly this afternoon. But I'll address you on that after lunch.
Can I just make a point regards the modifications? The modifications proposed as set out in the matter statement that Ms Henderson's just referred you to are the ones that we're proposing. There's an incorrect point in the modification schedule that was published recently. So there's an error in there that isn't replicated in the matter statement. So we are getting some copies printed for participants to have, so that we're clear on which bit we're referring to. So just to note that.
That'll be helpful, thank you. Anything else? In which case, then I'll draw us to a close this morning, and see you at 2 o'clock this afternoon.
See you too. Thank you.
Thank you very much, everyone. Until then.